Part 9. To conclude, the 9th witness will tell us about betrayal of the city, and the 10th about urban aesthetics. My task will be to collect evidence for the thesis that a close but unsuspected connection exists between the two. We know now that the polis is a psychodynamic reactor in which human beings' mad desire is intended to be brought under control to fuel democratic goals. If the city stokes up ambitions that can no longer be spent within its own walls, then it will produce its own traitors. Plutarch summed this up classically by referring to Alcibiades' splendid talents at rightfully inducing the Athenians to make very contradictory judgments. The poet Aristophanes described the problem early on with a metaphor. Quoting from the Frogs, "It is best not to rear a lion in the city, but if you must, you had better humour its ways." Athens' psychodrama of rearing lions that play with the state and finally break out of it and tear it to pieces appear in a highly concentrated form in an anecdote by Plutarch. Once when Alcibiades succeeded well in an oration which he had made, and the whole assembly attended upon him to do him honour, Timon, the misanthrope, did not pass slightly by him, nor avoid him as he did others, but purposely met him, and taking him by the hand said, "Go on boldly, my son, and increase in credit with the people, for thou wilt one day bring them calamities enough." Some that were present laughed at the saying, and some reviled Timon, but there were others upon whom it made a deep impression. So various was the judgment which was made of him, and so irregular his own character. Although Plutarch lived nearly 500 years after the scene described above, he could still sense that he was touching on a dangerous secret. By retelling antiquity's most obscure political anecdote, he gave a brief glimpse of the risks of breeding human beings for politics and high culture. He had his reasons for quoting, in that same passage, the words of a wise Athenian, Archistratos, who said that Greece would not be able to stand two Alcibiades. It is not difficult to imagine Plutarch himself saying what I will now posthumously attribute to him. The most gifted and handsome city-dweller, the enchanting youth Alcibiades, who radiates intelligence, energy, ambition, and visions, is an urban monstrosity. He is the city-dweller who combines all the best characteristics of the typical city, to such a degree that his fellow men see him as a monster, and he is compelled to behave like one towards them. Alcibiades' betrayal of Athens ensued only because Athens, by uniting the best options in one individual, created a monstrous figure that naturally rose above his city. If Pericles did not exist as the positively contrasting monster that flourished totally within the concerns of Athens, Alcibiades would stand alone as the prime product of Greek human breeding in the context of urban politics. As for the later king's son, Alexander, although he played with cities, laid waste to cities, and founded cities, he was by no means a city-dweller. Alexander and Alcibiades were both political beings whose immense potential reached out into the realms of the apolitical. Plutarch described Alcibiades' enchanting, extravagant character in chapter 23 of his biography. For he had, as it was observed, this peculiar talent and artifice for gaining men's affections, and he could at once comply with, and really embrace and enter into their habits and ways of life, and change faster than the chameleon. One colour indeed, they say, the chameleon cannot assume. It cannot itself appear white. But Alcibiades, whether with good men or with bad, could adapt himself to his company, and equally wear the appearances of virtue or vice. At Sparta he was devoted to athletic exercises, was frugal and reserved. In Ionia, luxurious, gay, and indolent. In Thrace, always drinking. In Thessaly, ever on horseback. And when he lived with the Tissaphernes, the Persian satrap, he exceeded the Persians themselves in magnificence and pomp. At this point, we are almost inevitably reminded of Nietzsche's controversy with Wagner over the rise of the theatrical type. Wagner had created his own Olympus in Bayreuth, where he was able to lord it over the Germans as an artistic god and rogue, a German entry into the present-day star system. Alcibiades started his games for social success in Athens, competing informally with gods and heroes. While leading a fleet on a campaign far from the city, he was sentenced to death for the crime of mimicking the Eleusinian mysteries and insulting the goddesses during his drinking bouts. He was accused of having worn priestly robes and arrogantly addressing his friends as initiates and illuminatis, epoptai. As is often the case with someone highly gifted, it's difficult to tell whether he did this seriously or as a joke. When Alcibiades heard about the judgment, he completely renounced his fatherland, entered the service of Sparta, and waged war against Athens, almost as if he wanted to make Timon's evil greetings a reality. Meanwhile, Athens, for its part, was obliged to be grateful when the traitor returned to be celebrated by the Athenians, whose admiration pleased him most of all. When cities decay, they become stopping-off points on tours by demigods and monsters. Part 10. This brings us effectively to the end of our course in negative political theory. Any modern reader can easily understand the moral of the Alcibiades story. Our age is justifiably called the Century of Wolves. It could have been called the Century of Monsters, or, more critically, the century of the catastrophic breeding of urban monsters. Nowadays we understand the justification for such formulations a little better. The European city is a powerhouse of ambition that eventually causes losses for its operators. The most gifted creatures bred by cities shoot beyond them like living satellites. Great careers generally lead out of cities and hardly ever back to them again. At most they pass through them. In the end, the madness of the best persons has little to offer city politics. It is precisely the best who are condemned for treason. For a long time, Hans-Jürgen Seiderberg, the Alcibiades of Munich, has been unable to do anything in Germany that would correspond to his potential. Nowadays he is only able to do large projects abroad. In the age of globalization, evolution has rapidly moved beyond the city and has deprived it of its fatherland, and has deprived it of the role of a fatherland. Those who move factories to locations on the cheaper periphery are no longer seen as traitors, and people who hide capital in tax havens no longer betray anything except the profit instinct, which is seen as healthy. If some people move their jobs from the public sector to working in industry and banking, the only ones who can criticize them are those who can stop them. Nobody. If leading research scientists, famous directors, conductors, Formula One drivers and top managers switch to a different camp, they have the right to do so, and it is what everybody expects from them anyway. Lopez is only a typical Alcibiades of capital. We should note, however, that world capital today can afford not just 2 Alcibiades, but 2,000. The city, on the other hand, even the most powerful city, will gradually realise that it cannot carry on behaving as if it is still the subject of some story or another. People who hold out in the city can only try to prove their usefulness sometime, somewhere, to someone, if necessary just to themselves. Or, like our last witness, they can dream of a sovereignty that is at the same time both absolutely urban and absolutely apolitical. The last politics of the city is the aesthetic defence of the city. Let us hear Baudelaire once again as the witness for the modern age. His prose poem, Les Feuilles, The Crowd, shows how the political city is betrayed by its aesthetic defence. It is not given to everyone to blend into the multitude. Enjoying the crowd is an art, and only he can gain a stroke of vitality from it. at humanity's expense, whose good fairy at his cradle bequeathed a taste for travesty and mask, along with hatred of home and passion for travel. Multitude, solitude, equal and convertible terms for the active and productive poet. Those who cannot people their solitude can never be alone in a busy crowd. The poet rejoices in the incomparable privilege that he can, at will, be both himself and another. Like a lost soul searching for a body, he enters when he wishes into any character. For him all is vacancy, and if certain places appear to shut him out in his eye, they are not worth a visit. Who walks alone with his thoughts draws a singular intoxication from this universal communion. Whoever readily commingles with the crowd knows feverish pleasures eternally denied to the egoist, locked like a strong box, or the sloth, confined like the snail. He takes on himself all professions, all the joys and all the miseries that circumstances hand him. What men call love is petty, limited, feeble compared with this ineffable orgy, with this sacred whoredom of the soul, which renders itself entire, poetry and charity, to the sudden unexpected, to the passing unknown. It is good sometimes to remind the favoured of this world, were it only to bring down their stupid pride, that there are felicities greater than theirs, larger and more refined. Founders of colonies, pastors of the people, missionaries exiled to the end of the world, no doubt know something of these mysterious intoxications. And in the bosom of the vast family that their spirit has formed, they must sometimes laugh at those who pity their so troubled fortunes and so chaste lives. The poet, as a Catholic snob and a mystic, has no qualms about confronting the arrogance of the big city challenge. His flexible soul wishes to be the place in which the city mingles with all its inhabitants. The synesthetic orgy is the price for the attempt to communicate with everyone who lives with close neighbours in metropolitan areas. His communion with them all shows that even the saint in the city must necessarily become a monstrosity. He is the monster that the increasingly monstrous urban world brings into human focus. However, the attempt to be everything to everybody does not create an apostle, but somebody who prostitutes his or her integrity. I shall conclude with a remark related to the diagnosis of our times. Today I believe we have more than one reason to rethink Pindar's reminder of politics for mortal human beings. The 2,500 years of European experiences with human beings, gods, and monsters are obviously impressive. They show that if we want to understand cities and states, we have to understand something of their inhabitants' madness. The Parisian prince of the opera, Jacques Offenbach, never missed an opportunity to declare, "I don't understand anything about politics." And why should he? His musical theatre made him the psychiatrist of the bourgeoisie in a direct fashion. This much is clear in our times. Mere politicisation is no longer helpful to humankind. To be sure, there was, and still is, a political awakening from apolitical dreams. In fact, the revolutionary New Age wished to be nothing but an awakening of this kind. But there is also an apolitical awakening from political dreams. Since the days of Plato, moments of this other kind of wakefulness have shimmered through Europeans' consciousness. In places where neither of these two forms of awakening occurs, the body politic perishes. City life, for the citizens of Western Rome in the 4th and 5th century, still consisted mainly of waiting for the barbarians. For the people of Byzantium in the 15th century, it was waiting for the Turks. Many Europeans today act as if their only choice is to wait for the monsters, or for the prospect of civil war. If we wish to refute these tired contemporaries of ours, these dead souls from the Atlantic to the Urals, the best way is to give plenty of examples showing that recombining the two forms of wakefulness in new ways produces new arts of living.